So I think I'll just kick it off with a question for the whole group, but maybe start with you, Nikolai. I was thinking as listening to all the presentations we had today, and a lot of folks on this call, obviously, this is going to be the first time that they're seeing SQL on Fire, seeing what view definitions are. It's really, yeah, I think you can start simply, but it is going to be a lot to process. We've done a lot of work in a lot of different dimensions, but I'm curious to know what you think the best way, your advice for folks who want to get started with SQL on Fire and sort of get their hands dirty.
That's a good question. I would recommend to feel the power of SQL. So just spend some time, and flatten your data question, and the chatbot will tell you how to do that.
Meaning your Fire data. You might have spent a lot of time and effort putting your data into Fire,
Yeah.
but you have this desire, right? There's this lack, that's something that I've seen and experienced working with clients who have their data translated to Fire, and it's almost the opposite, where they're like, I can analyze this data with SQL, with my BI tools, with my analytics pipelines, and now I put it into Fire, and now I can't, right? How can I get that back almost? I've seen it from that direction as well. But let me just throw it out to the rest of the group.
And I have one note.
Yep.
We just recently had a discussion about, is it worse to store data as a FHIR? And I got to the idea that it is, because FHIR is very generic. That means it can store data without changes. Yes, so you don't have to change schema, because FHIR designed it that way that it can aggregate a lot of data. Yes, with the different schemas. So, and having this universal schema and then making use case specific schema from it sounds, to be honest, very interesting option, because if you look at the engineering of the system, changing database schema is always very painful when you're changing schema. So then everything breaks around. Yes. And if we take FHIR as a kind of storage, as an initial format, and then apply this view definition, we'll bring this gap to simple, useful flat tables. But they are case specific, and you may have multiple different views on top of the same data. And
let me open it up to the rest of the group on thoughts on, advice on how to get started, how to just get your hands dirty with SQL on Fire.
So I have one thought that I'll throw out there, which is that you don't have to necessarily start with, your healthcare institution's enterprise data warehouse, right? So you could start, if you have a research project and you do a bulk export of a cohort of patients, or you have a FHIR crawler that makes a bunch of REST requests and pulls some data out of a clinical system, or you pull some data down from one of the public APIs, some claims data that are starting to be offered by a number of the payers in the United States. So you can have these smaller subsets of FHIR. And then if you want to kind of work with those in an analytic capacity, or use a notebook to work through some research hypotheses off the data, and that seems like a great use case to start with a real world scenario where you have a need to flatten data and you have the data to be able to use SQL on Fire kind of in earnest. And then I guess the thing I'm excited about long term is maybe you will move your enterprise data warehouse to a FHIR base and then a bunch of use case specific tables on top of that. But you certainly don't need to start with that. You can certainly start with, 1,000 patients for a particular project, or even a smaller cohort. But curious if other folks have other ideas as well.
Yeah, I certainly like that incrementalism. Any other thoughts from the group?
Yeah, I'd love to see something like this. Should just share my screen. So Brian Postlethwaite has written a FHIR lab, which is a website where you enter a resource and a FHIR path, and then you can evaluate what's happening inside the FHIR path and see what the results are. It'd be sensational for us to have something equivalent where you can upload a bunch of resources, feed it a view definition, and see live the SQL, the row set that comes out of that. That would really help people get going in terms of defining their view definitions and seeing how they work. So maybe that's something we can work on between us.
Yeah, and we are not far away from that, because we already have a demo of SQL on Fire JavaScript implementation on the page. And I know that DuckDB and SQLite can run in browser, so we kind of one step ahead of this. So, and I think we will make it, and it's going to be the part of standard, our specification site.
Yep.
Dan just sent me this link. So, I mean, Dan could show it, but here's what I imagine it's already done. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I don't want to take credit for this. I think Nikolai did most of the work on this, getting the reference implementation online. I'm
That was
just pointing to it.
Josh Mandel initial work.
Oh, it's Josh. Okay.
I just yes.
You guys stole my thunder there. That was going to be my recommendation is just go to this link. So out to the audience, you can literally get your hands on SQL on FHIR and view definitions in 20 seconds. Obviously, it's the reference implementation. It's obviously a toy implementation, but that's one way to start to get a feel for SQL on FHIR. And of course, that's something that we can progress further in the future. Something like, I've heard that there are DuckDB implementations in the browser, maybe WebAssembly, I'm not sure, but that could be really interesting for folks. That's another very hot piece of technology going on. That's two hot pieces of technology coming together with Duck and WebAssembly. But so that is the lowest cost way that I know of to get your hands on SQL on FHIR. But I'll go over to you, John.
Yeah, the thing that's been on my list and mine and Nikolai's list to build is basically a smart app that's either like a view definition builder or it could also be kind of characterized as maybe more generally like a patient cohort builder and selector, if you like, and it could launch off any sort of bulk enabled FHIR endpoint and basically request a bulk extract and either request it already transformed with a particular view that's known or just get it and transform it. And that would be, I think, a really useful tool in its own right, but also useful for, like Graham said, sort of playing around with view definitions and testing out how they will be applied to data in various different FHIR endpoints around the place.
Yeah, it's another great idea. So that's a couple of ways to get started in a very lightweight way. Another question I had in mind was, well, folks have seen a broad diversity of where SQL on FHIR is today. What's on the roadmap? What is the SQL on FHIR group thinking about in terms of next steps of development? We talked about a couple, but where do you folks want to see SQL on FHIR progress as a standard, or even a broader set of FHIR analytics? It doesn't necessarily have to be SQL on FHIR. So I'll pick Dan. So you're right in front.
All right. I guess there are 4 things at least on my kind of short-term roadmap, but I hope that this roadmap really, our collective roadmap gets really informed by kind of real-world use and use cases. So ideally, as folks try to use view definitions and run into problems, we'll have a lot of good fodder for directions to take it. But I think there's kind of 4 things that come to mind to me as like direct next steps. The first is APIs. So kind of building on what John was talking about, and I think Nikolai's kind of view definition builder, the ability to kind of plug into the FHIR REST API and do searches across view definitions and edit view definitions so that we're part of the FHIR ecosystem is really important. So that's one class of APIs, and the other class is kind of overlaying view definitions on export from FHIR servers. So being able to say, in addition to being able to export everything as NDJSON, potentially being able to say, I've created a bunch of view definitions. I want to export this set of data with those view definitions and getting back data in some format, maybe CSV, maybe Parquet. We can figure out exactly what we're doing there. But I think those 2 types of APIs would be really valuable. In my presentation, I mentioned that a priority for me is figuring out a story about value sets for some of the SQL generation. So, in simplified examples where you have one lab code that you're looking at, it all works really well. But in the real, often for a lot of use cases, you'll have, you'll want to look across a bunch of ICD-10, ICD-9, and SNOMED codes for a condition. And so being able to group those as value sets and then kind of pass that around as an artifact into your view definitions seems like it would have a lot of value. So I think just kind of off the top of my head, sorry, I hadn't really prepared a formal list here, but those are 3 things that are really kind of high on my priority list for roadmap and direction. But love to hear what some of the other folks on the project think.
I think that's a great list. Yeah, I definitely agree with every one of those. And then one in particular is like packaging up those set of view definitions and related content. I'd love to see I mean, maybe we establish patterns for putting these all like in an implementation guide. It kind of fits that spirit where everything's there. And then and as that sort of happens, like this opportunity to sort of collaborate on implementation guides. So if there's a particular collection of views that are useful for some set of use cases, it'd be great to reuse those across those sort of things. So I think that's like perhaps one of the most exciting spaces is if we can kind of package up and have reuse, and then suddenly the interface to a lot of FHIR workloads becomes reuse of SQL on FHIR implementation guides that you can drop into your favorite technology stack. I mean, I think that opens up a huge set of possibilities that haven't exist, but also big plus one for the member of and the value set integration. There's so many patterns that fit that I think that's definitely probably the biggest sort of technical need that I see that we want to make sure is well supported.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I knew you'd have good answers to this, Dan. That's why I picked you. Nikolai, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the guys, and I would love to see how we will battle-proof the SQL on FHIR, for example, with this FHIR to OMOP project. So that would be like, yeah, exercise for the SQL on FHIR, and yeah, definitely terminology integration. That's what we need as well to start competing with the SQL. Okay, I pass my turn.
Yeah, I think we're in broad agreement across all of those as well. I think a query resource, I would see this as like a component of that larger packaging. It can potentially be used independently of it, and then as a component of a package. And what's so interesting, I think, and there's a lot of interesting aspects about the FHIR to OMOP use case, but it really does exercise a number of different areas that we want to develop in a pretty significant way. So just another plug to the community. I'm sure there are a bunch of people interested in FHIR to OMOP on the call. So please get in touch with us. We're definitely looking very specifically for more collaborators in this space. And I see John has his hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say on the terminology stuff, I think it makes sense to follow the same pattern that the philosophy we've had so far, which is to sort of have abstractions like in the spec, like through functions or whatever, and enable a sort of diversity of implementations under that. So, I can really imagine where we could have really sort of lo-fi, SQL friendly, even offline first type terminology solutions. And we could have really sophisticated online FHIR terminology services type implementations of that, but they can all sort of be concealed behind the same sort of interface. And whether we just keep it as member of or whether we look further than that, I think, there's probably some other candidates there as well, but member of is a great start. And I think there's more thought to be put into how to do terminology in a SQL environment. And some of what Carl was alluding to there about OMOP, like it really is kind of an expression of that. I think that's another theme for the future.
Yeah, terrific. I think we're going to reuse the idea of lo-fi terminology and hi-fi terminology, like that framing there. So another question, this might have come up for people. What's next for SQL on FHIR in terms of becoming an official HL7 standard? Any thoughts from the group on that?
We decided to be the FHIR Foundation project, yes. I think that's good for us for a couple of years. It's better to ask Grab what are the recommendations for the SQL on FHIR spec.
So we are definitely looking at the FHIR Foundation, but turn it over to Grab.
I mean, I think that the two different things here. One is view definition becoming a proper part of a FHIR standard, and the other is all the rest of the projects being FHIR Foundation project. That makes sense and is a separate question. I certainly would like to see view definition become part of the FHIR standard itself, whether as a full resource. I'm not sure what the time frame for that should be. There's pros and cons for hurrying and pros and cons for going slow on that. And I haven't got a firm view on that. Maybe we'll see. I think it would be really interesting to have practical experience in the use of view definition outside FHIR. Like there's some pretty good ideas in FHIR, and FHIRPath is okay. It's kind of my baby, so let's take this with a grain of salt. But it's pretty good language. Is it something you would use generically for transforming XML or JSON to a row set, not just with FHIR? I'd be interested in that question. maybe that would influence my thinking about where it should go as a standard. So that's something for us to think about. But view definition is, from my perspective, it's a bit of an odd duck because it's almost a resource, but it's not a resource. And now that I've done what I did to integrate it with Implementation Guide Publisher, now I have editors going, can I just treat it like any other resource and all the features that I get with that? I'm like, no, I have to do a whole bunch of work because it's not a resource. So I certainly am personally interested in it becoming a full resource, but that's for my convenience. And this is not about my convenience, it's about implementer convenience.
Yeah, so what does that look like, Graham? So does effectively the semantics of the view definition kind of just get imported into that resource? Does it just become a JIRA ticket? Does it get progressed through one of the existing working groups?
Well, I mean, it would be FHIR infrastructure as a working group. And we're going to talk about HL7 internal stuff. Yes, there would be a JIRA that said, hey, this thing that we defined over in this implementation guide, we should escalate it and turn it into a real resource, and then just really copy and paste it over, and then rewrite the implementation guide to say, well, we use this thing that's defined over there, and fill out all the details about how to use it in the implementation guide. Yeah, that's not procedurally very difficult. The question is around, to get sort of back to what Nikolai hinted at, we're still learning. Maybe we can make this thing better. It gets harder to make it better once it moves into the core spec. But actually, that's a feature because everyone goes, they kind of sealed this thing and said, you can go ahead and really write code on against this thing and they're not going to change it. So again, there's pros and cons, right? So, in a typical sense, what we've learned with FHIR over the years is you go through a phase of rapid development, total change, changing scope, everything's in the air. And then over time, you get more people who've implemented it, you get more implementation knowledge, you get more agreement about what won't change, and there's less pressure to change because you've bashed at it. And then, but every so often someone comes along and says, hey, what about X? And you go, well, it actually makes us rethink about that. But that happens less and less as you get further into the process. And my feeling is there's still a few things that we haven't resolved. Like I've got uses for view definition that use some FHIR path features that are specifically excluded in order to make it possible to do view definition to turn them into SQL views. Like those kind of trade-offs, I think there's going to be quite a bit of pressure on some of those trade-offs as the really awesomely clever things you could do to mix and match across multiple sets of resources to build really clever tables that have incredibly tough processing requirements. That trading between different trade-offs.
And I think, yeah, we have like 7 implementation, which are passing tests. So we were very careful about features. So we are not adding like experimental features. Yes, even if there are some, dubs, we like exclude the features. So that, and I think we're quite ready to, probably to be the part of the core spec. That's my feeling. Because it's really stable for half year. Yes, so the last breaking changes when the Graham joined the group. Yes, we a little bit reshaped the view definition.
Yeah, the other question I had for Graham was like just in terms of timeframes, like with FHIR itself, because I'm not really up to date with what's happening with R6 and all that sort of stuff, but is there sort of a window of opportunity to get, say, a new resource into the spec that will close at some point?
Yeah, we'll close at some point. Given that it's going to be pretty immature resource that's specifically marked as still subject to change, the window's pretty late. I'm not sure how late it is. It's certainly later this year or early next year. I mean, if we really pushed, we could go later next year, but it's getting to be a bad idea. So maybe January working group meeting is kind of decision point for that one. Should possibly ask for agenda time from FireEye to discuss the pros and cons around that and try and firm up a decision then. R6 itself is slated for publication, late next year or early the year after. So you've still got, in terms of Nikolai, 6 months, still got, effectively a year to nail down what would be settled in R6. in terms of experimental features, just thinking about some of the things that I'd like to be doing with, from my point of view, we talk about storing. Nikolai talked about storing FHIR directly. I talked to a lot of implementers about this, and storing your resources, storing your databases, FHIR resources, pros and cons. Always there's pros, and the pro is what Nikolai said: super flexible, super robust, super interoperable. But the con is big, which is that some, particularly the base screens of your application, typical clinical applications will present some kind of list as a base screen, which is a list tailored to each user of what they need to be thinking about. It's the patients they've got to go visit to do medication administration, something like that. Those lists, in my experience in clinical apps, are carefully tailored. They super clever about how they're shown constantly, and they have to be shown super quickly. And in a typical clinical environment with, in a 1,000-bed hospital, you might hit 100,000 resources to build that list. Super hard to do that off a native FHIR store. We didn't write FHIR to optimize that. It's not what it's for. And you just can't operationalize that. I've talked to some people who are writing national level systems for clinical, running off a single happy server under a desk, and running a nationwide clinical information system. We're talking Africa here. We're not seeing that in the in the industrial world. And what they do is they're super constrained about how they develop their application by the lack of the ability to do those kind of lists in an operationally performant way. And for me, and Nikolai's clearly going to add on to what I'm saying about this. Nikolai and I talked about this before. Some kind of SQL on FHIR thing that allows you to stretch across multiple resources and prep those tables so you can do them at warp speed. You can't develop a full-blown application without something like that. And so I think that once people really dive into developing full-blown clinical applications with a FHIR store, they're going to need some kind of SQL relational table to make that stuff performant. And they're going to be doing a view definition, and we're going to start hammering on stuff that makes it easier for a server to manage live indexing. And that's not stuff that's in view definition yet. So that's part of stuff that I'll be pushing on. But anyway, Nikolai, go.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to highlight the new trend, which we see, that when people moving from one HR to another because of life cycle of applications, they now want to go through the FHIR CDR as the intermediate storage. And this is good trend, I think. So this is the first idea why I think it works to store. And for me, storing FHIR doesn't mean it should be database. It could be even like bulk export, or S3 buckets. So that means that the source of truth is a FHIR. And about like performance stuff, so this is our engineering challenge. So you missed the presentation of John, but John showed like real-time analytics dashboards for emergency department. And I think so everything is possible. So there's a renaissance of databases. There's a lot of, I don't know, tools around, like DuckDB can handle like billions of records on one machine very fast. So, and I'm pretty sure that we can solve this problem. And when we solve this technically, so then FHIR will become like very nice option to store the data and unify. That's my take. And you guys, can you add something?
I think that's a great vision. We are coming right up 3:15, so we're nearing the end. I don't know if anybody from the group has a couple of last words. No? Okay, well, so let me close it off by saying thank you to all of our attendees, all the participants for their sessions. We're a very open and collaborative group, so we'd love for you to get involved with our community here. So we gave you a couple of links. We'll send out post-event emails as well, giving you links and tips to get involved. There'll be a post-conference survey, very short survey. We'd love for you to fill that out and really get to understand your use cases better. But yeah, finally, thank you. This is our first sort of big conference of our group. And yeah, we're very happy to share our work with you and would love to continue to work with you in the future. So thank you very much. And please be in touch.